Good Yontif, and Shana Tova, everyone. If this were a normal year, I wouldn't have to begin by saying that I'm Cantor David Proser of Kempsville Conservative Synagogue, Kehillat Bet Hamidrash in Virginia Beach, because I'd be speaking to a live audience in our sanctuary today, rather than speaking to you on YouTube. If this were a normal year, we would have just finished the Torah and Shofar services, put the scrolls away, sang Eitz Chaim He, and on the second day of Rosh Hashanah, I'd be getting up to the bima to begin my sermon. If this were a normal year, I wouldn't be here on YouTube saying, please be sure to like, subscribe, turn on your notifications, and feel free to leave comments below. If only this were a normal year. So please excuse the use of an expression that just about every clergy will be using this year somewhere in their sermons. And that expression is, this has certainly been anything but a normal year. It's probably the most unique year, and by extension the most unique Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur holiday period of my life, and I would estimate in yours also. There have been holiday periods in the past where unique happenings have influenced how we approach Rosh Hashanah. For instance, Rosh Hashanah of 2001, right after 9/11, every rabbi in the country was tearing up their sermons, shelving them, and rewriting them because of the calamitous events of the previous week. I well remember the comment of a longtime congregant who remarked how comforting it was to be in shul with her congregational family and all the familiarity of the holiday rituals and melodies. Or the Rosh Hashanah of a few years ago followed closely on the heels of a hurricane in which many lost power for a few days, and for some families, the loss extended into Rosh Hashanah. Or Rosh Hashanah a year or two ago, where there was a shortage of kosher poultry. Or, not a Rosh Hashanah, but a few years ago, when our synagogue had a power failure late one Friday afternoon while we were preparing for a Shabbos dinner with Temple Israel families invited. We ended up heating the food with sterno, eating by candlelight, and it was a great time had by all. Luckily for many of us here at KBH, the actual effects of these and of other similar events, not counting 9/11 of course, were not life-altering, but rather inconveniences that we can look back on and give thanks that the long-term effects were minimal. But even considering these few examples, I think we can all agree that this year has certainly been unprecedented. We have to wonder, is this some divine message? In the words of the writer Abigail Pogrobin, whether or not Jews have faith, and the reality is that many are on the fence about that, there's no doubt that 2020 has prompted people to think anew about the powers beyond us, events that defy explanation, and whether we're being called in some way. Our synagogue and most churches were closed for over 4 months. That was a major disruption in our religious lives. What did we do? How did we respond? How do we turn major disruptions into minor inconveniences? Did we grieve for what was lost, or did we imagine what could be rebuilt? Let's compare this to a situation that occurred almost 2,000 years ago. In the year 70 of the Common Era, the Second Temple in Jerusalem was destroyed by the Romans. Shortly before the final capture and destruction of the city and the temple, Rabbi ben Zakkai, the youngest and most distinguished student of Hillel, and a member of the Sanhedrin was smuggled out of the besieged city. He hid in his coffin, and his supporters convinced the defenders that he had died in order to be let out of the walled city. Once outside, he had to go through Roman troops in order to go free. He was taken to Vespasian, the Roman commander, where he asked for permission to go to the town of Yavne and establish an academy to continue the study of Torah. In return, he gave Vespasian a prophecy. He told the general that he would soon rise in rank to emperor of the Roman Empire, something that did in fact become true. Vespasian granted his request. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is widely regarded as the most important Jewish figure of his time. His escape from the Roman destruction of Jerusalem that allowed him to continue teaching Torah was instrumental in Judaism surviving the destruction. His school also functioned as a reestablishment of the Sanhedrin. He was the first Jewish sage attributed the title of rabbi in the Mishnah. Referring to a passage in the book of Hosea, "For I desire mercy, not sacrifice," he helped persuade the Sanhedrin, the ruling council of rabbis, that with the temple destroyed and having no place to offer animal sacrifice, to replace animal sacrifice with prayer, leading to the emergence of Rabbinic Judaism. The past ages of Jewish worship of God via sacrifice at a central temple was replaced with a future of Jewish worship consisting of prayer, Torah study, and the performance of righteous acts. Taking a lesson from history, we can now ask, are we still waiting for the return of normal? Or are we discovering and beginning to appreciate aspects of our new normal? Or are the two not mutually incompatible? When our shuls shut down, the USCJ, the United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism, the National Organization of Conservative Synagogues, joined with the Rabbinical Assembly, the National Organization of Conservative Rabbis, to offer guidance as to what could be learned from applying Jewish history and interpreting Jewish law in order to better help us cope with the restrictions on mass gatherings at the time. We developed ways to continue to connect with our KBH families weekly for Shabbat services. We joined our programming partner, Temple Israel, to offer daily morning and evening minyans, as well as Shabbat services via Zoom. I joined with Rabbi Panitz to post a Friday evening Kabbalat Shabbat service and a Saturday morning Shabbat service on YouTube, so that those who wanted to could daven with us at their own pace. We continued and still continue to post weekly sermons and Torah reading explanations on YouTube. We held board meetings and committee meetings via Zoom. When restrictions were eased, we formed a task force to investigate how to safely return to live services in our building, while also offering services via Zoom to those who felt it was not time yet to join public gatherings. We started live services in July with restricted attendance, safely distanced seating, mask requirements, abridging the service to shorten time spent together, restricted touching of the Torah, not sharing prayer books or talesim, and other alterations to the service to promote pekuach nefesh, the preservation of life. These same principles guided us as we developed parameters for our holiday services. Steps taken to minimize exposure included not only those that I listed, but also my coming to you today on YouTube rather than live on the second day of Rosh Hashanah, so that you could watch this year's sermons, appeals, and divrei Torah at your own convenience, so as to shorten possible virus exposure time while seated in shul. We are also rescheduling Yizkor for the Wednesday night between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Who would have ever thought to do such things in the past? For that matter, who knew that the word Zoom would take on such an expanded meaning that would affect us all this year? With all of these challenges, how do we best remember that our basic objective of Rosh Hashanah is still teshuvah? Self-introspection and making changes that will put our lives on a more positive trajectory. This year especially, we must ask ourselves, to what are we returning, and how will that manifest itself in our lives? Maybe we should pair those questions with, do we always need something radical to make significant change? If so, we certainly have the evidence of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai that it can be done, and we've seen those results on a global basis for almost 2,000 years. If so, we also have the evidence of how we've responded to our new normal in our synagogue worship. Via safety precautions and Zooming, we see those results on a more local basis. And if not, then what's to stop us from relegating all of this year's obstacles to the category of minor inconveniences like those of the recent past, and get on with what we would normally do on Rosh Hashanah anyway? In any event, wouldn't we draw upon our collective as well as our personal history, our crises and difficulties, as opportunities for change and renewal? In past years, especially of late, I would talk about things I had learned during trips taken throughout the year, and of course relate them to lessons that we could all apply to make our lives more meaningful and bring more Judaism into our everyday lives. Obviously, that's not going to happen this year, at least not on the same scale. Last December, we did get to Baltimore for a weekend, and we spent a few days in Savannah. I was going to say nothing major to report from those trips, but looking back now, I can certainly recognize something teachable even in those short trips. The importance of seeing family and old friends whenever we can, because we can never tell when those opportunities will be limited. Instead of trips this year, due to COVID, I discovered so many programs online that I developed a new appreciation for such easy access to Judaic learning, entertainment, chazanut, cultural programs, and yes, even socializing. We certainly missed having our family, our kids and grandkids, as well as many from our KBH family, at our Passover Seders this year. But in the past, I could never have imagined having a Seder that included family from the Atlantic to the Pacific and from Pennsylvania to Florida at our Seder. I'm certainly not saying I'd like to keep it that way, but were these opportunities always available? Was I the one who never looked for them? Or did our organizations, our Judaic educational institutions, and even us personally recognize the challenge and rise above it? The answer is yes. Just as the Jewish people have regularly bounced back from trauma, persecution, and existential crises, so too will we, as a people and as individuals, grow from this past year of unprecedented challenge. As in every other year, whether we're sitting in a synagogue or watching on screen, let's experience the holidays of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur with the goal of bringing more Torah and more Judaism into our lives. If I may suggest a way to make the prayer services just a little more meaningful this year, especially for those who will be participating via Zoom. In normal times, there's many parts of the service where we might stand or sit in the congregation and pray quietly, or just listen to the Chazan sing. The prayers and the feeling of the holiness of the holiday just encompass us by just being there. Just like the comfort that one congregant felt on the Rosh Hashanah after 9/11. But if you're not there, is it really enough to just listen? How can you replace the feeling of being with your fellow congregants? This year, we need to verbalize our prayers out loud, especially if you were at home. Sing out loud. Make the prayers yours. No one will know if you don't have the tune right. No one will know if you are mispronouncing the Hebrew. No one will know if you were off key. God doesn't care. God isn't critiquing the music. God isn't judging you on the quality of your spoken Hebrew. God is judging the sincerity of the prayer from your heart. God is hearing the enthusiasm of your song. As Rabbi Lisa Gelber teaches in her JTS Parsha commentary, whether we study text, immerse ourselves in prayer, invite someone to Shabbat or Yom Tov dinner, maybe not this week, but when we can do so safely, hold the door for another, or be sure to cast our vote, our commitment to living a life of mitzvot, exploring what brings meaning into our lives, and opening our hearts often and enough to experience surprise at what we learn may awaken us to God's presence in our lives. As we work diligently to keep inconveniences from becoming catastrophes, as we manage and eventually overcome the current obstacles that we have been thrown our way, as we strive to not let these current conditions blind us to our responsibility during this time of Rosh Hashanah to re-examine our lives, our behaviors, our relationships, and not be afraid to implement change where required. Let us also recognize our unique responsibility that this year, by social distancing and mask wearing, to protect others, perhaps even more so than protecting ourselves, we are performing a mitzvah that, hopefully, in the words of Rabbi Bradley Artson, will awaken us to a fuller understanding of ourselves and our obligations toward other human beings. May we all be blessed with a year of good health, of peace, of prosperity, of family, of divine protection, and of a proven vaccine to prevent and effective drugs to cure COVID-19. Ken Yehi Ratzon, Shana Tova Umatuka.